Hi, Byron.
Hi, David.
Welcome back to Blogging Heads TV, where you can't tell whether we're wearing pants or not.
No one needs to know.
Now, I saw you at the prom on Saturday night.
And I saw you too.
Yes, you looked lovely in your strapless gown. It was, we're talking, of course, about the White House Correspondents Association dinner,
right,
which happens once a year in the springtime.
That's enough, don't you think?
What?
That's enough, don't you think?
That's enough?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. Although there's also the broadcast dinner, which happens
right
a month or so beforehand, in which people in Washington who want to be seen or want to see people who want to be seen go to the Washington Hilton, and you get to mingle with your 2,500 closest friends in the media and the political world, with always a very light sprinkling, as a weatherman might say, of celebrities. George Clooney, Lawrence Fishburne. There was the guy from Desperate Housewives. I don't watch, so I don't know. And if it wasn't Terry Hatcher, I'm not interested.
Well, now, really, in the Bush years, the celebrity quotient is frankly not been as good as it was in the Clinton years for pretty obvious reasons. But George Clooney is, pretty far up there. So even one super top tier A-list celebrity is pretty good for that dinner, don't you think?
Yeah. Now it used to be this tradition of bringing celebrities really started back in the 80s when Michael Kelly, who presented the New Republic, brought Fawn Hall. And for you youngsters out there, that was Oliver North's very glamorous-looking secretary who had a very cameo bit in the Iron Contra scandal when he asked her to stuff papers that he wanted carried out of the White House past guards into, I believe, her inner garments. And she showed at the White House dinner Michael Kelly's arm, and that sort of set off a sort of a celebrity arms race amongst media entities to bring the biggest gun celebrity they could find.
Every year there is competition for somebody, and it doesn't have to be a George Clooney. One year it was Paula Jones. Another year it was Kato Kalin. It's been all sorts of people. But the fact is if you get 2 or 3 semi-big celebrities, that's pretty huge for Washington.
Now, we don't want to dwell on this social event, but there are things to talk about here. The highlight of the night, or low light, is always the president, trying to be funny, whether it's President Bush or President Clinton or anyone else who's participated. And then there's usually a professional comic. And this year, people probably know that Bush came out there with a double who sort of spoke the internal monologue of what Bush was thinking as Bush, went through pretty modest and standard speechifying remarks. And, listen, my feelings about the president are pretty well known. I thought it was a brilliant routine. It was tremendously well written, well executed. When the president, when the real president would say, "I'm happy to be here tonight," the double would look at the audience and go, "Why can't I have dinner with the 36% of the country who likes me?"
That was a good line.
There are lots of very good lines. I mean, it was very self-deprecating. Made fun of himself for being seen occasionally as a doofus, and it was very disarming. What did you think?
Well, I would agree with you. I thought it was very funny, and I think I got the sense that most of the people in the room thought it was funny because, Bush, at these dinners, Bush always tries to find a different way of doing the stand-up routine because he's not all that great at just a straight stand-up routine because he's not a comedian. He's done slideshows. He had Laura do it last year. He's done all sorts of ways to kind of avoid having to stand up and actually do this. This was certainly the most clever, and it was very entertaining. And also, presidents get some credit just for trying, and I think he certainly got that.
And it worked well. I mean, some Americans who would rather not have a president who can be made fun of for not pronouncing the word nuclear and getting things wrong, might not see the humor in this. But before we get to what was the big question, whether it's important or not, it was the big question of the night, whether Steve Colbert was funny. I mean, there's something to me, though, about the whole event that's a bit surreal. We're in the middle of a war, a very serious time, and you have 2,500 media people in Washington and members of the administration, the president, get together, all to sort of, have a good time and show how funny they could be. And last year when Laura Bush filled in for him, I very self-righteously wrote a piece saying that neither she nor the president made a single mention of the troops serving overseas or the war. And this year, came around, and Bush really didn't say much about it, except at the very end of his routine, he said, "God bless the troops." I don't know. I feel queasy about this. I'm not sure I want a commander-in-chief who thinks it's, important to get out there and do a good bit when Americans literally are dying each day for a war that he's commanding. And, maybe that's being a little bit too much of a fuddy-duddy. But it's not. It's
well,
not.
It may not be fuddy-duddy. It's just kind of unrealistic. I mean, I suppose it'd be possible to have him not appear at these dinners for the last 3 years with Iraq, or perhaps just give a kind of an update on the troops. But on the other hand, you have to remember the audience does that kind of stuff all the time in the course of their jobs. And also, it is true that the Correspondents' Dinner and this supposedly lighthearted presentation often comes at odd times, either uncomfortable, as you say, with the war, or just kind of weird, because it came at this time in 1998, for example, when the Lewinsky scandal was just huge, and everybody thought, my God, what is he going to say? Come to think of it, I can't remember exactly what he said, but I think he certainly stayed away from the news of the day. So there's always a kind of a disconnect between this backslapping dinner and whatever is actually happening in the news.
But I think to the public at large, it does look as, because they rarely see the inner workings of Washington. There really is no event where this side of official Washington comes together, other than this dinner, and they see it, and they see everyone kind of like seeming to pal around and to make light of the news of the day. And I go. I laugh at the funny jokes, and I search out sources for the book I'm working on, but I still feel uncomfortable, which brings me to the subject of feeling uncomfortable, to Stephen Colbert's performance. You go first with your review.
Well, at the time, and I still feel this way, but in the room, I just thought he wasn't that funny. And I don't know if it was, I think the real reason it was not that funny was it was written like a left-wing blog. And the left-wing bloggers, as you know, just loved it, and they're kind of irate that it's gotten so much criticism. But it wasn't actually funny. The other problem was that it was done like he does his program, and I think what we discovered and didn't know before that is the program works, at least for some viewers, when it's in the studio, but it doesn't work as well in a big hall in front of a live audience. So, I thought he kind of bombed. It wasn't awful, but I thought he did bomb because his shtick just didn't fit the room.
Well, having done stand-up comedy maybe 3 times now, I qualify as an expert.
That's 3 times more than I have.
Yes, and it seems to me that the one rule that he, or a goal that he didn't accomplish was they didn't connect with the audience.
Right.
Now, that may just be that, and I think the material that he had, I thought the material was brilliant. And I thought there were a lot of double backflips and curveballs and knuckleballs. And I thought I was laughing while I saw the people squirming around me. But nevertheless, you have a crowd that's very big, that's very diffuse. Some might not know the shtick to begin with, which he comes out and he plays the conservative, like Bill O'Reilly.
Right. I mean, the humor was all in one direction. I mean, he was making fun of the president, of course, and he was also making fun not of the press as a whole, but really of Fox and Bill O'Reilly in particular, right?
But yes, some of his criticism of the press was more wide-ranging. For instance, when he said, the job of the president is to decide. The job of the press secretary is to explain, and it's your job to type. Type it up. And he said, listen, look at, you didn't do anything on the WMD front. You missed this story, you missed that story, you missed Jack Abramoff and all these other things. So just stick to typing. And then you have more time to write that novel about the crusading Washington reporter who uncovers corruption. Fiction. So he was, in a way, attacking, the press corps at large for not being more penetrating and more critical, particularly on the WMD issue before the war, and that's something that obviously doesn't go over well with this crowd.
Right.
So it was a bit that worked, that was trying to work on a couple of different meta levels, and
the White House Correspondents Association dinner doesn't do meta. I mean, it just doesn't.
No, I think you're right, and so there was just you never got the the comedy room psychology going where the crowd got on his side and wanted him to be funny. It was always like, what's going on here?
Right.
And he never got away from that. I thought the film he did was pretty good, in which he had Helen Thomas pursuing him as press secretary to get an answer to the question why we invaded Iraq. But I thought it went on way too long.
It did go on too long, and it wasn't nearly as good as the film that Clinton did in his last year of the president sitting around,
and of course,
losing power and having nothing to do.
And as I said earlier, he had a hard time poking fun at Bush after Bush had poked fun at himself so well. And
yes, everybody should know that Colbert followed Bush, and that put him in a very tough spot to begin with.
Very tight spot. I was happy that I appeared in his film for about 2 seconds.
You did. You were in the White House press room.
It was wonderful to work with him. I'm waiting for my residuals. But outside of the left-wing blogs, even on the New Republic blog, the Plank, as they call it, they gave him kind of thumbs down, and that was from a Bush basher, Noam Schreiber. So, I'm in a minority, I recognize that, but it was certainly true that he did not go over well.
David, that's because you're a Washington insider and you're not crashing the gate. If you were crashing the gate, you would have thought it was really funny.
Well, I thought it was pretty funny. So let's move on to the next subject.
Okay.
And we go from comedy to sex. CIA, Republican congressmen, and prostitutes. Can it be? You talk about...
Well, now, wait. Which, other than the jailed Duke Cunningham, which Republican congressman are you talking about right now?
Well, so far they're going unnamed. Let me see if I can find
let's just leave that,
No. We'll be fair. We will say, we'll turn to the Wall Street Journal, that well-known radical lefty-driven newspaper, a piece that came out last week, which got some of the blogosphere talking, saying that the people who've been investigating the Duke Cunningham scandal and going after the contractors, Brent Wilkes and I think it's Michael Wade, who bribed him, are also investigating whether Duke Cunningham was supplied with prostitutes as part of the bribes. And here's, this brings it to the plural situation here. They are focusing on whether any other members of Congress or their staffs may have also used the same free services. So we don't have names, but we have the Wall Street Journal telling us that the feds who are looking at the Duke Cunningham case are investigating whether or not prostitutes were provided to other members of Congress.
Well, we should say that one of the names that was tossed about kind of irresponsibly, I think, is the head of the CIA, Porter Goss, who was a congressman from Florida before he went to the CIA, and he has flatly denied it.
Yes, and we do not believe at Blogging Heads, here at Blogging Heads TV, in casting irresponsible claims, but we feel it's free to fair and free to throw about anything that appears in the Wall Street Journal. And what's interesting about the Porter-Goss angle is that the guy he brought in to be the third-ranking CIA official, a fellow named Dusty, I don't know what that means, Dusty Fogo, sounds like a Lord of the Rings character, is being investigated for giving a...
By the CIA, by the way. By the CIA Inspector General. Yeah.
Inspector General, for getting... Actually, he gave a contract to one of these two contractors who bribed Cunningham.
Right.
And this company got, let's see, what was it, a couple $1 million to provide bottled water, first aid kits, and other supplies to CIA agents in Afghanistan and Iraq. And the company had no previous experience with such work, and apparently it charged, can you believe this, too much. That's according to the San Diego Union Tribune, which has been out front on the Duke Cunningham story. So it doesn't tie the CIA yet into the prostitute scandal, but you got to.
But you
if
can hope.
you're a Republican, you got to be thinking, come on, how much more can we put up with here?
Well, a lot could happen. I mean, I don't know, but you have to remember that in this case, the only one who's wrongdoing has been proven is Cunningham, and he's in jail. So clearly, there have been things that have resulted in Tom DeLay saying he's not going to run again. Everybody but thinks Bob Ney, another Republican congressman, is in trouble. Cunningham is in jail. You're right. I mean, that's three right there. But as far as the sex thing, I don't know what's going on there.
Well, let me ask you this: if there is another member or two of Congress who end up being indicted in the out of the Abramoff stuff, or other names end up being caught up, real names for real reasons, being caught up in the Cunningham case. Does that, what does that mean for the Republicans?
Well, right now we have three kind of Republicans who are either in serious proven trouble like Cunningham, or they're like DeLay and Ney. There are two Democrats, Mollahan of West Virginia and Jefferson of Louisiana, who are in serious ethical problems themselves. Mollahan had to leave the Ethics Committee at the behest of Nancy Pelosi for having real estate investments that multiplied in astonishing ways over relatively short periods of time. So, if the score is 3-2, I don't think that works out as a culture of Republican corruption in Washington.
Well, if there, my question was if there are indictments of Republicans as opposed to Democrats having ethical.
Well, if there are indictments, Democrats could be indicted too,
They could. I think in Mulholland's case, probably not. He argues. I think it does look suspicious.
Yeah.
But he does argue that his assets went up a lot, but also his liabilities did too as he got into.
Well, but the Cunningham thing looks suspicious to begin with. We'll see what happens. I think Jefferson probably is definitely more serious, isn't it?
Well, speaking of Republicans and indictments, let's move on to issue number 3. That is Karl Rove and the CIA leak case.
Karl Rove, the non-indicted Karl Rove.
The non-indicted Karl Rove, the yet to be or never will be.
Right.
But this is his 5th appearance before the grand jury, and that certainly isn't any fun for him.
No. And this is insane. No private citizen who was in real criminal jeopardy, and let's assume that Rove is in real criminal jeopardy.
Well, we don't know.
None of them would appear before a grand jury and put themselves at risk 5 times like this, when they don't even have to appear once, or they could appear and take the 5th.
Right.
Because of Rove's political position, as it has been with other people in other administrations in the past, he just can't do that. So now he has gone 5 times, which is a pretty amazing fact.
It is pretty amazing, and the question is, he spent, I think, over 4 hours there. What is he talking about? Karl Rove's attorney has been telling reporters that it was to clear up what he said in his first grand jury appearance in February '04 about not remembering a conversation he had with Matt Cooper, in which we now have email indicating this. He told Cooper that Joe Wilson's wife worked at the CIA. Now the question is whether he seriously did not remember that, or whether he was sort of putting up a spin story and then changed his testimony later when it turned out evidence would be forthcoming. But it seems to me that on that particular issue, it's very hard. I mean, grand juries are famous, or prosecutors are famous for drawing out grand jury appearances because they ask you the same question 30 different times. But even if you would talk about this on your 5th time in for 30 different ways, I still don't know how that stretches out to 4 hours.
That's
my suspicion is that Karl Rove's attorney is not telling us the whole truth, and that there are 1 or 2 other pending issues there that have had Patrick Fitzgerald, the special counsel, thinking very closely about indictment. But what they are, I don't know.
Well, there's one other issue that we do know that we think they talked about, which is issues that have arisen since Rove's last testimony before the grand jury, which was at least 6 or 7 months ago. And one of those was the whole Vivica Novak Time magazine affair. And that was an instance in which Rove's lawyer, Robert Luskin, said that he had had a conversation with Vivica Novak, who at the time was a reporter for Time magazine, and that the gist of the conversation suggested that Rove didn't know or didn't remember that he had talked to Matt Cooper back in that original, June 2003 phone conversation.
So
we know that that's something that happened, and Novak was questioned by prosecutors, Vivica Novak, and so that's something that Rove easily could have been asked about.
That's what this is all about. This is all about the Vivica Novak conversation is all germane in regarding Rove's first grand jury appearance. And Luskin's defense here of Rove is that before that grand jury appearance, he says, Vivica Novak can't confirm this because she spoke with Luskin several times, but Luskin is claiming that in one of those conversations before the first grand jury appearance of Karl Rove, that he said to her, Rove has no problem with Matt Cooper here, and she said, that's not what I hear. And that indicated to Luskin that there was a rumor, there was evidence, there was information that may come out showing that indeed Rove had spoken to Cooper, and the reason why Luskin believes it's important is he obviously told that to Rove, and it would have been silly then for Rove to say he didn't remember a conversation that he had with Cooper if it was possible that information about it might come out. I mean, I understand the rationale here, although I see it as a little bit of a bank shot.
Well, that is a reasonable argument, although obviously the reason this whole thing has gone on so long is that Rove originally, we believe, told Fitzgerald that he didn't remember talking with Cooper, and then because at the time that Rove said that, Cooper was refusing to testify. And once Cooper lost his legal fight and was forced to testify and testified that he talked to Rove, then Rove kind of remembered that he had talked to Cooper. Now, there can be an innocent or a non-innocent explanation for that, and I mean I think that's what's taken Fitzgerald so long.
For whatever reason, Fitzgerald is not letting Rove go free yet.
No.
And for all of us, sometimes I've stopped speculating about it on my blog. I hope we get some closure here, one way or the other, soon. It will also help me with the book I'm writing. So that's my plea to Patrick Fitzgerald. Big event this week was the immigration day of boycott, protest, rallies, whatever you want to call it. Earlier Monday, there had been some talk within the immigration community about whether it was a good thing or not, and some groups didn't back it. In some places, there were big demonstrations and big signs of support, such as in Chicago. I was impressed with the TV footage I saw there, and I don't know. I don't know what effect this is going to have. I don't know if it'll have an impact on the going nowhere congressional debate.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I went to my usual sandwich shop the next day, and I saw the people behind the counter who are Latin American, and I was just wondering if sort of a more general effect or consequence of this event would be that people just sort of look a little bit longer at some of the folks here who do the work and do the jobs that you often, don't pay close attention to.
Probably not. I mean, I think it was only big in 3 cities: Los Angeles, Chicago, and Denver, I think. And when there is a big rally, it gets people's attention. There was one in Washington on April 10th, which I went to, and I have to tell you, I was surprised at how big it was. It was really big, and that got my attention in a way that it wouldn't have gotten if there had been a couple of thousand people. This latest May Day series of rallies, I don't think was a big deal. And also, a couple of things. A lot of the rallies, like the one here in Washington on April 10th, have a heavy union presence. The unions Unite here, and the service employees unions are very big in pushing more liberal immigration policies because they want to unionize more low-wage, unskilled workers. In Los Angeles, there is a bigger presence, and it finally got into the paper this week, of this group called International Answer, Act Now to Stop War and End Racism.
Yeah, don't get me going.
No, you wrote a very, very good piece about that right at the beginning of the big anti-war rallies, before the war in Iraq really started. International Answer, it's an interesting group. They're actual communists. Watching them in action is kind of like going into Jurassic Park. Here's this species that you thought was extinct, and there they are, living and breathing and walking around. You wrote a very good piece on that, very critical of them. And the people in the immigration movement are very worried about their participation in them because they believe correctly that it taints the movement. So this is a movement at times that's split a number of ways.
It seems to me that that their role, while logistically, quasi-significant, maybe in Los Angeles and a few other places, is still the type of thing that is secondary to what seems to be the more I don't want to say spontaneous, but quasi-spontaneous impulse that I think is happening or going through the immigrant community, illegal immigrants, undocumented workers, whatever you choose to call them. And I do think there is, it sounds like a cliche, but a little bit of an awakening here. And my guess is that the international answer people are trying to come in and ride that wave, and the people who are putting together these organizations hopefully will wise up to who they are and not let them go too far down that road. Where do you think the debate stands now, the political debate on getting any legislation out of Congress on immigration?
Yeah.
I've said all along that I don't think anything's going to come of it, and that the bottom line is that the Republicans can't come up with a consensus position or a near consensus position on what to do about the 11 to 12 million workers here now, who half the Republicans want to literally round up and deport back in 200,000 buses, and the other half want to put on some path to either legality, if not citizenship. So
now, are
what do you
Democrats
think
united on this, in your view?
What?
Are Democrats united in this?
I think there's probably more. If you look at the Democrats, on something like the McCain-Kennedy bill in the Senate, you had almost every Democrat behind that, with actually Byron Dorgan, a populist from North Dakota, raising some questions about what that would mean for low-wage
workers. He gave the
workers.
old-style labor union argument that I was surprised more Democrats didn't say.
Yeah, I'm surprised by that too.
Yeah.
And I think some of the Democrats should be, considering that, but putting substance aside, as we are loath to do here on Blogging Heads TV. I mean, the Democratic caucus in the Senate is far more united on this than Republicans. And Republicans, listen, they're in charge. They control things at the White House. So I think it's fair to start with the question, where are they? You think they've made any progress?
No, not a whole lot. As a matter of fact, I think they're going backwards because a lot of Republicans are out of touch with not only the Republican base, but even the larger group of people who tend to vote Republican on this. And those people are very, very pro-enforcement and anti-amnesty. And I think you're seeing on both sides of the aisle, because Democrats are talking this way too, is you're seeing more and more emphasis on enforcement first, tough enforcement, blah, blah, blah. But then they immediately say it has to be followed by comprehensive immigration reform. And I think a lot of people, speaking of Blogging Heads TV, Mickey Kaus writes a lot about this, there's no real reason why it has to be comprehensive right now. And, I think that is probably that idea is going to dawn on people more and more, and will likely sink the idea of comprehensive immigration reform this year. But border enforcement is getting more and more popular.
Yeah, I missed you that. Is getting more and more what?
Popular.
Popular. But do you think they can pass just a border enforcement bill?
Well, I don't know if they could. I don't know. I don't know. But I think it would be politically popular to pass that. Even Barack Obama, I think, said, you can pass border enforcement and then remain a little vague about what happens after that in terms of immigration reform, in part because you don't want to set off a stampede to the borders.
Well, right now, the president doesn't seem to be weighing in on a particular...
And the president is totally out of touch with the Republican base on this. I was talking to one Republican strategist who said he hears more and more from people who say, these are diehard Bush fans, who say, I love W, but. And the but is not the Iraq War or the budget or anything like that. The but is immigration. And so there are a lot of people, Republicans, who are mad at the president about this.
Now that sets up the perfect segue to our next chapter on this unfolding edition of Blogging Heads TV. And Byron, so when we were emailing back and forth about what it is we would chat about, you said you had been looking at some of the recent polling numbers on Bush, and you had found or discerned what you thought was some interesting data.
Well,
do tell.
There is a little bit. This is the poll that was released recently that showed his job approval rating down to 34%. So on the tapes of the White House Correspondents' Dinner, he can make the joke, why can't I talk to the 34% of the people who like me? But
you know what? I think it's funnier with 34% than 36%. Okay. If you could get down to 28, it'd be even.
It would be a scream, wouldn't it? No, but the interesting thing about it is, of course, these polls always contain the question: do you approve of George W. Bush's handling of the economy, the war in Iraq, healthcare, that kind of stuff? And in this latest poll, Bush's approval rating for his handling of the war in Iraq is higher than his approval rating for his handling of immigration.
Do you know what the numbers are on each?
32% approved of his handling of the war in Iraq, and 26% approved of his handling of immigration. Now, if you were a president of a political party and you got elected with about half of the people's votes, and you get 26% approval on an issue, that means you have lost your base. And this is graphic evidence of Republicans peeling away from Bush on this one issue.
Now that has to be pretty frightening. At the White House dinner on Saturday night, I ran into William Schneider from CNN, who does all their
right.
polling reading, and I guess he does some of the polling too. And I kind of asked him. I said, "How low can Bush go? I mean, if he's at 34%, and you figure, people basically, look at this country as being a third." Roughly a third Republican, conservative, a third Democratic liberal, and a third in between, although, those numbers fluctuate a bit, have been lower on the liberal Democratic side in the last, 5 to 10 years. But, if he's down to, a third here, really, is he only with the people who love Bush despite everything else?
Well, he can go lower. It's possible.
But actually, that's what Bill Schneider said. He said there's still room to deprove here.
Right.
I mean, he could go lower. And it was Nixon got into the high 20s, but that was after Watergate.
Right.
It's pretty. I think it's pretty stunning here. Harry Truman got pretty low as well. It was like 23, 24%. But here you have a president, who claims to be fighting a war that really is keyed, on his claim, I don't buy this, but to the survival, to protecting the survival of the United States. And the American public is looking at him and saying, we don't buy it. We don't buy you.
No, they're not buying it's not that they're rejecting the premise of the war. They're rejecting the execution of the war. If the war had been over by now, or if the war was going very well by now, it wouldn't be the problem.
Well, you sound like my wonderful wife. Every time we go out shopping, she says, gosh, if that, $1,000 couch was actually $75, we'd buy it.
Well, of course, but the thing is that it's about 2,400 Americans having died so far,
right,
in the war, and if that number goes down, public approval of Bush on Iraq will go up. It's that simple.
Right, but the problem is too, the war.
And it's not the premise. They won't be mad that Bush claims he's fighting terrorism, and they don't really think so. It's just the fact that there is this rather significant sacrifice going on now, and they don't see the improvement.
Yeah, well, and $10 billion a month, and
right.
a sacrifice that he never really prepared the country for, and or anybody else. And of course, from the get-go, he kept talking about, I was just looking at this today in the fall of 2003. He kept saying we're making progress, when actually things are going in the opposite direction. So yes, if things turn around in Iraq, Americans are result-oriented. They will, not hold it against them if things go better.
Right.
But at this point in the game, the signs, despite the the recent formation of a new government, well, partly, we're not all the way there yet, taking steps towards that. I still think that, in terms of his own credibility and his ability to persuade anybody that they should be sticking with him, which, you'd expect a wartime leader to be able to do, you at least would hope a wartime leader could do, he doesn't have any of that.
Well, but you've got to remember, as far as his base is concerned, he's being hit by other things as well. We've mostly forgotten it now, but the nomination of Harriet Miers to the Supreme Court hurt him badly with his base. I think he got over it, but it hurt him badly. The ports deal hurt him badly with the base, and immigration is hurting him badly with the base. So these are three non-war issues that are hurting Bush with the kind of people who usually support him.
Right, and I think the war issue brings him down now only to his base, and then those other issues cut into that.
That's right.
So, independents, and of course, a lot of Democrats and liberals have totally, bailed on the war and hold him, and feel very angry, I think justifiably, but towards him on that. And he's really only left with his base to support him on the war. And even there, you see, the retired generals speaking out, and you see hawks like Bill Odom, former National Security Agency head, former general, who has a piece in Foreign Policy magazine. We'll link to it on the side here, saying we should be cutting and running. So it's not just wimpy liberals, peacenik types who have soured on the war, and you know, it's people like Anthony Zinni who called it a brain fart.
Well,
So
obviously, you have 60+%.
It's gotten out of the liberal ghetto here.
Yeah, you have 60+% of people who disapprove of Bush's handling of the war. So it's
68%, according to what you just told me.
I just said 60+.
Yeah.
There's some people who aren't sure. There always are people who aren't sure. But anyway, it's more than 60%. So it's clearly including some Republicans in there, and some probably some base Republicans.
Right. Well, I think so. I mean, I think, you know, there are people out there who are campaigning, Republicans who are worried about even their Republican supporters on the war. One thing that my associate, Ari Berman, here, I'll turn the camera so you can maybe even see him. There he goes.
Running out the door.
Running out the door. Just told me he was just looking at a poll. Let's see if I can put this back here. He was just looking at a poll, and he said that in looking at favorable and unfavorable ratings, that China is ahead of Bush right now amongst
What
Americans.
do you mean, like, who do you like?
Like,
China or George W. Bush?
If you're favorable or unfavorable towards, you know, any of the below. And right now, China is ahead of Bush.
Where's France?
Good news for Democrats. It shows that Bush has a lot of room for improvement. And speaking of room for improvement, I think we did better than last time. And next time we have you on, we'll do even better than that.
Who knows? The sky's the limit, David.
Yes. So, again, thanks a lot for playing with us on the Wayne's World of Punditry. And we'll see you real soon.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.